What Back to the Future taught me about science and engineering. I didn't fall in love with science because it felt safe. I fell in love with it because it felt dangerous, strange, and alive in a way that ordinary life was not. The first time I saw Back to the Future, I was 5 years old. I didn't understand the plot mechanics or the character arcs. I did not grasp paradoxes or narrative structure. What I understood viscerally was the DeLorean. It did not look like a car. It looked like a rupture in reality that had clawed its way into a suburban driveway. The scene where Doc reveals it coming out of the back of the truck, smoke everywhere, lights, that honestly was terrifying to me. The scene lingered in my mind like a nightmare that refused to resolve itself. Yet fear did not push me away. Instead, it welded itself into my curiosity. That same image that made me uneasy also made me lean forward. Eyes wide, heart pounding. That combination of dread and wonder is in many ways the emotional signature of real scientific discovery. At 5, I did not have a language for it, but I absorbed a powerful idea. The film suggested that the universe was not fixed or closed. It implied that with enough understanding, human beings might alter reality itself. Time, which adults treated as untouchable, appeared negotiable. Not mystical, not miraculous, but mechanical. Built, engineered, and therefore open to manipulation. That implication mattered more than any individual scene. It planted a seed that would grow slowly over years. It was not simply that time travel might be possible. It was the deep knowledge that the world could expand and what was possible at all. The movie smuggled the idea into my imagination, wrapped in spectacle, humor, and adventure. Years later, at 11, I watched the film again. I was closer to Marty McFly's age, yet my attention shifted away from him. As a child, I had admired Marty's bravado, his skateboard, his guitar, his effortless cool. In adolescence, that influence became real. I gravitated toward rock and roll, rebellion, and performance. Music became my language for a time, and that path shaped me in important ways. Yet on rewatching the film, I found myself increasingly drawn to Doc Brown. Marty represented style and defiance, but Doc represented thought himself. He was not merely an eccentric. He was a mind in motion, constantly questioning, tinkering, adjusting, and reimagining. Where Marty reacted, Doc reasoned. Where Marty improvised socially, Doc improvised mechanically. His laboratory was the opposite of a textbook environment. It was cluttered, chaotic, and seemingly disordered. Clocks hung from every wall, wires snaked across benches, vacuum tubes glowed, and strange contraptions occupied every surface. To an outsider, it looked like madness. To anyone who has ever built anything real, it looked familiar. That lab did not feel like fiction. It felt like the backstage of invention. It mirrored the messy reality of creative work, where ideas arrive faster than organization and progress is stitched together from spare parts, failures, and last-minute fixes. The film never explicitly said this, but it modeled it visually and emotionally. Genius did not reside in cleanliness. It lived in productive chaos. The moment in Back to the Future 2, when Doc returns from 2015 and laments the state of the lab, struck me deeply. He is apologetic by the disorder, yet that disorder is the visible residue of relentless experimentation. It is not negligence. It is evidence of effort. Real engineering, as I would later learn, often looks like that. Not polished blueprints, but workbenches layered with attempts, revisions, and abandoned directions. In that sense, the flux capacitor functions as more than a plot device. It becomes a metaphor for every project's fragile core idea. Every serious build has its own flux capacitor, the component or concept everything else depends on. In my own life, the role has been played by lines of Python code, microcontroller boards, soldered circuits, and half-broken prototypes that refuse to die. Sometimes the core idea works. Sometimes it fails spectacularly. But in both cases, the act of pursuing it shapes the entire project. The movie taught me implicitly that it is acceptable to organize your world around a strange, risky, and slightly absurd idea, as long as you were willing to wrestle with it seriously. As I grew older and began studying actual science and engineering, I started to notice the cracks in the film's logic. Time travel as depicted in the movie ignores basic physics. If the DeLorean simply jumped backward or forward in time without adjusting its spatial coordinates relative to Earth's rotation and orbit, the result would be catastrophic. The planet moves at thousands of miles per hour through space. Without precise calculations, the car would not land neatly in a parking lot where it started. It would likely materialize in midair or deep underground, or completely out into outer space. That realization doesn't ruin the film for me, though. Instead, it sharpened my understanding of what the movie was really doing. Back to the Future was never a physics lesson. It was a lesson in mindset. It taught that the universe operates by rules, but those rules can be understood, challenged, and creatively bent. The distinction matters. Many stories portray science as either magic or bureaucracy. Either it is a wand that solves everything instantly, or it is a dull maze of equations that crush creativity. Back to the Future offered a third path. It presented science as adventurous, risky, and deeply human. And Doc Brown was not a detached genius. He was emotional, impulsive, and compassionate, and also flawed. He panicked, he celebrated, he made reckless decisions. Yet underneath that theatrical personality was a rigorous approach to problems. He did not treat reality as a suggestion. He treated it as a system that could be molded, tested, and manipulated. The archetype, the lovable mad scientist who's still competent, shaped an entire generation of engineers, hackers, and makers. It suggested that you did not have to be the cold or antisocial to be brilliant. You could be strange, passionate, and messy and still produce meaningful work. Looking back, I can see how deeply that image influenced my own trajectory. I did not become an engineer because I loved neat diagrams or standard procedures. I'm working on becoming one because I love the idea of wrestling with reality itself. I've always wanted to understand the way things work, why they broke, and how they could be fixed. This movie also reframed failure in a subtle but powerful way. Marty and Doc do not succeed because they are perfect. They succeed because they iterate. They make mistakes, correct them, and try again. The entire trilogy is essentially a prolonged debugging process where reality keeps breaking and they keep patching it. That is a surprisingly accurate metaphor for real engineering. Rarely does a project work on the first attempt. Instead, you build something, watch it fail, diagnose the failure, adjust your design, and repeat. Over time, the system improves not through brilliance alone, but through persistence. As a teenager, I oscillated between music and mechanics. Rock and roll gave me expression and identity. Science and engineering gave me structure and depth. At times, they felt like opposing paths. In reality, they fed each other. The improvisational energy of music made me a better problem solver, while the discipline of engineering sharpened my creativity. Back to the Future existed at the intersection. It was loud, theatrical, and emotional, yet grounded in machinery, experimentation, and cause and effect. It suggested that art and engineering were not enemies, but partners in understanding the world. When I eventually began building things of my own, from small electronic projects to software tools, I realized how much the film had prepared me emotionally for that journey. It had taught me to embrace weird ideas rather than to dismiss them. It had encouraged me to treat curiosity as a virtue rather than a distraction. At the same time, studying real science made me appreciate the film more deeply. I could now see where it cut corners, but I could see also why these choices were made. Storytelling requires simplification. The challenge is not to eliminate complexity, but to preserve its spirit. In that sense, Back to the Future succeeded brilliantly. It did not teach orbital mechanics, but it taught respect for systems. It did not explain time dilation, but it communicated the seriousness of consequences. It did not provide equations, but it inspired a generation to seek them out. Over time, I came to understand that the true gift of the movie was not technical knowledge, but permission. Permission to be curious, to be playful, to experiment, and to fail publicly. Permission to treat the world as something malleable rather than fixed. That mindset carried into every aspect of my life. When confronted with a problem, I began to look not only at what was broken, but how the system worked as a whole. Instead of accepting limitations, I looked for levers and loopholes. Instead of fearing complexity, I learned to map it. Today, when I look back at Doc Brown, I no longer see a fictional eccentric. I see a cartoon version of the real engineers and inventors who push boundaries in the world. People who spend years wrestling with stubborn materials, unreliable components, and their own imperfect understanding. They do not always succeed. In fact, they often fail. But their failures are productive. Each misstep reveals something new about how the world operates. That is the essence of scientific thinking. If I distill everything Back to the Future taught me, it comes down to the simple ideas that science is not about memorization. Engineering is not about perfection. Both are disciplined curiosity, creative risk, and relentless iteration. It's very unlikely that people will invent time travel. I will almost certainly never build a working DeLorean that bends space-time. Yet that does not diminish the value of the pursuit. The act of trying to understand and shape reality itself is transformative. In my own work, whether writing code, soldering circuits, or designing systems, I carry that lesson forward. Build boldly, test honestly, fail visibly, fix what breaks, and try again. The world is vast, strange, and full of hidden structure. Back to the Future did not reveal that structure, but it invited me to explore it. It framed science not as a cage of rules, but as a playground with boundaries worth pushing against. Ultimately, that is why the film still matters to me. It is not nostalgia alone. It's a reminder that curiosity, when coupled with rigor, can make life richer, deeper, and more meaningful. We probably won't change history by harnessing lightning in a silver car, but we might be able to change our own trajectory by daring to ask how things work and refusing to accept easy answers. And in that sense, Doc Brown did more than entertain me. He recruited me into a lifelong conversation with reality itself.